Hi, I'm Gabriel Bergmoser, and I'm an author. So my book, The Caretaker, published by HarperCollins, follows Charlotte Lawrence, a young woman on the run from something. We don't initially know what, we just know she's scared. She's taken a job under a fake name as the off-season caretaker of a tiny little abandoned ski resort. She thinks she's safe, she thinks she's alone, she thinks there's no way that people looking for her can find her. But somebody does find her. Somebody who initially seems kind of harmless until strange things start happening around the resort, and Charlotte begins to realize that all of her escape routes are being sealed off one by one. I think The Caretaker is, in some ways, extremely different from my previous novels in ways that really terrified me during the writing process. I mean, The Hunt and The Inheritance were both very action-driven books. There was always a lot of go, go, go. You have a character in Maggie who was this sort of ruthless, shoot first, ask questions later type character, the kind of person who, if threatened in the slightest, will retaliate with extreme prejudice. Charlotte isn't like that. And so in writing The Caretaker, in order to suit a character who is far more concerned with just being left alone, who doesn't want any trouble, who doesn't want to hurt anyone, who just wants to keep her head down and stay out of trouble and stay away from all the things that have haunted her and have damaged her, the book kind of had to suit her as well. So the book had to be a little bit slower, a little bit more based on tension, a little bit more based on paranoia than it was that same kind of, I guess, bone-crunching, blood-spurting action, although there might be a little bit of that sort of more towards the ends. But for this one, I really wanted to focus more on the slow burn, which initially did scare me. But as I kind of got in the rhythm of it and I guess figured out how to write in that slightly more measured tone, I sort of arrived at something that I was really satisfied with. So I think when it comes to setting, there is sort of nothing more important in an Australian crime novel. And a lot of that's because of the precedent that's been set by authors like Jane Harper and Chris Hammer. I grew up in Mansfield near Mount Buller, and so I got very used to being around ski resorts in the off-season. And there is this unique, eerie beauty to those places. This, I guess, sense of somewhere that you know part of the year round is vibrant and bustling and full of color and life, and there's so much going on. But for so much of the year, they sit there empty. Now, a lot of those ski resorts do have year-round residents, but some don't. Some sit there literally abandoned until the winter comes back around again. So in terms of coming up with a location that A, somebody could hide out, potentially not be found, and B, a location that would be unsettling and eerie and still kind of strangely beautiful for a thriller to take place in, you kind of can't think of anywhere more perfect. So a lot of Charlotte's backstory is based around her toxic relationship with her partner, soon-to-be husband, Dominic, who she initially meets as this incredibly charming, rich, wealthy, charismatic young man who slowly she figures out is not quite what he seems to be. Now, I've been really fascinated by the different forms in which toxic relationships take, and it's not always outright abuse. It can often be much subtler and more insidious than that in a way that can kind of discombobulate the person on the receiving end of it. And one way that can manifest is through love bombing, which is something that we see early on in the book, in that he love bombs her. He creates a scenario where this young, naive person doesn't really know any better, and then he starts to take that away from them. Now, I think that toxicity in relationships, that's not something that is only found from male to female sides. That can happen, from either partner to either partner. And I often find that toxicity, even if it's not outright abusive, comes about from an unbalance of love and from somebody being aware of that and taking advantage of that in some ways. And I think without going too far into sort of, the ugly demons that haunt the book or where it comes from or whatever, I think we've all had those relationships to one degree or another. And I think what you have to do in writing this, and particularly writing it from a female perspective, is to in some ways draw on your own experiences, but also to do the research, to do the work, to talk to people who've been in these kinds of relationships, and then try to approach writing it with the utmost empathy and grace that you possibly can, because Charlotte makes some terrible decisions as part of this and in response to this, and you want to be really, really careful that you get it right. I think all crime writers, it's sort of I guess it's kind of a staple of the job really, is that we all have to be a little bit devious in one way or another, Like you're always trying to think of gruesome or potentially not gruesome ways to dispatch characters left, right, and center and everything. And whether you draw inspiration from your surroundings or from a book you've read or a movie you've seen or whatever, we're always thinking of kind of fun little interesting ideas like the traps that take place all throughout The Caretaker. That was kind of a matter of thinking, if I was alone and I didn't really have a lot of experience in this and I was hiding out on the run from people who mean me harm, what is a way that I could improvise using my surroundings to come up with ways to protect myself? And to be honest, as challenging as that can be sometimes, there's also a weird kind of fun inherent in coming up with those little dangers, those little threats, and those little ways in which this character, I suppose, takes vengeance on the people who are out to get her. So I think you do have to be a little bit devious, but I think having a slightly twisted sense of fun is also kind of helpful in some respects. The character of John is Charlotte's initial visitor on the mountain, and he is a jovial, friendly, avuncular, middle-aged man who seems completely harmless. He claims to be a writer, he's hired one of the lodges, he just wants some solitude to work on his book in peace and everything. And even though Charlotte is initially kind of suspicious and initially put on edge by him, he slowly just kind of wins her over through his unique offbeat charm and through just how entirely harmless he seems. But as the story goes on and as strange things start happening and Charlotte starts to realize that based on her understanding of the circumstances, it possibly couldn't really be anyone other than John who's doing it. And how does she reconcile the twisted things that are happening with this very friendly man? That's where a lot of the ambiguity and the tension hopefully starts to come from, and with complicating factors that introduce the book goes on. Now, the character of John, a lot of readers remark on this character, I guess, because I suppose he is the fundamental conflict or crux around which the book revolves. And I do get asked a lot, was he a challenging character to write? And not at all. He was just so much fun. Like, I've always loved characters like Hannibal Lecter. I've always loved your Freddy Kruegers and all of that. And I'm not saying that's what John is entirely, but there is certainly a bit of ambiguity around his motives and what exactly he's doing there. And writing a character who is possibly sinister, but also strangely charming and always smiling, the kind of guy who you might actually want to be friends with. I mean, what a sort of delicious challenge as a writer to embrace. But also just to have a character in this very dark book who is always smiling, always in a good mood, always trying to be friendly and helpful and whatever. I mean, that was just a ball. And there was a lot of dark humor, I think, that could be found in that. So pacing a book like this becomes a particular challenge because in the case of The Hunted or The Inheritance, there was always so much action going on, There was always a new fight scene that could be dropped around every corner, or a new big reveal, or something else, a new turning point, a new twist. This is much more of a slow burn. It's a much smaller cast of characters. There's sort of just one contained setting apart from the scenes that take place in the past. And so pacing becomes a unique kind of challenge because, if you have your first massive fight scene or shootout in the middle of the book, it doesn't leave you with a whole lot more to go, particularly when the tension is all supposed to be building up all the way through. So you have to find other ways to keep the pacing moving fast. And in the case of this book, I think it became about trying to find the exact right moments to drop all of the reveals, to create new questions or new complications or new twists in our understanding of what the circumstances were, and then when to reveal what the answer to that was. And then hopefully in some of the cases, to cause the reveals to create new questions. So to me, the pacing in this book was more about playing with the audience's understanding at every corner of what was going on, of what is Charlotte running from, what is she running to, who is John, what happened to her in the past, is she guilty of the things she's been accused of, is she capable of the things she's been accused of, and to constantly play with those questions and to dole out the reveals in hopefully dramatic, tense, exciting ways without necessarily devolving into, fists and gunshots and knives and all of the fun stuff that, again, maybe comes towards the end of the book. But, to try to save that stuff for the end of the book and to find a different way to pace it to maintain the tension throughout. I think that pacing is something that I obsess over. Like, I truly, truly obsess over pacing, and that is because I'm terrified of boring my audience. I am always terrified of the audience kind of like rolling their eyes and being like, yeah, no, nothing's happening, that's it. And that's one of the reasons I was so scared of The Caretaker, because The Hunt and the Inheritance was so relentlessly action-packed that pulling back and slowing it down, as I said before, is something that can be really, really scary. So I spent nights walking around outside in the dark, thinking through the events of every single chapter of The Caretaker and being like, does enough happen here? Is enough revealed here? Does enough go on here? Because one thing that was once said to me about structure, and this, to be fair, is more pertinent to filmmaking than to novel writing, but I think the same basic principle applies, is that good story structure at its core is just having something interesting happen every 10 minutes. Something interesting happen that changes the game, that turns the story, that takes things in a different direction, that shifts our understanding. And I've really, really held on to that ever since I've heard it. And I think it's a really important thing to remember, in that if you linger too long in one area, narrative-wise, that's when you start to lose the audience. But I think one thing that I had to learn in writing this book is that those shifts don't necessarily have to be big dramatic life or death shifts. They can be smaller shifts in character and understanding. In terms of what is expected in crime writing, or what I suppose is necessary in crime writing, it's a challenging thing to think about, because I think that it's such a broad tent in which crime writing unfolds. I mean, technically crime writing covers Jane Harper, it covers, authors like Tana French, it covers Thomas Harris, who's writing serial killer thrillers like Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs. It also covers more fast-paced, action-packed things like what I'm writing in The Hunt and the Inheritance. I mean, I see Matthew Riley often characterized as crime drama or crime fiction. And I think, for me, crime thrillers need to be something that, in one way or another, takes us on a thrill ride into the dark side of humanity. And I think that we read crime thrillers for the same reason we go on roller coasters, or other people go on roller coasters. I do not go on roller coasters. I'm terrified of them. But I always think back to this great line in one of the Tomorrow When the War Began books, where I think it's Homer makes this comment about how when people go on roller coasters, they trick themselves into thinking that they're spitting death in the face. That they're having the adrenaline rush of being in a really terrifying situation that is actually completely safe. And I think that a crime novel, or a good crime novel, does the same thing intellectually, the same way that a horror movie really does. It's about creating anxiety and fear and even revulsion in yourself as you're looking into the face of some really, really horrible acts. It's like for the same reason that we slow down past car crashes sometimes, it's that same fascination we all have with morbidity and with the macabre and with the darkness that we all, to some degree or another, harbor. And to me, crime fiction is a safe place to explore that. And I think within those parameters, what you can do with that genre is extremely vast. There's a huge amount that can be done in there, but I think crime fiction to me is always characterized by that, for want of a less pretentious term, stare into the abyss. I do not think AI can write a thriller. Maybe this is controversial. I'm really not scared about this idea of AI replacing authors. I don't think it can be done. I think AI can learn the rules of storytelling. I think it can learn basic story structure. I think it can learn all of those things, but it can't learn the reason why we read or why we write. And not to sort of damn other writers I've known, but I knew writers, particularly at university, for example, who knew story structure and the rules of story structure better than anybody else. They had a meticulous understanding of everything you could find in any screenwriting manual you cared to name, whether it was Save the Cat or Robert McKee's story or any of that stuff. But their problem was that they wrote these stories that were so obsessed with adhering to all the structure of what a narrative is supposed to be, that there was no them in the story. There was no soul in the story. There was nothing in the story that they were itching to say. And that's always a problem. I mean, we go to certain authors because we want their perspective, we want their worldview, we want the things that they care about. And AI can never replicate that. It can imitate it, sure. But I just think back to recently, I was looking at I think it was a picture that jumped up on Facebook. And without even looking at that picture for more than 2 seconds, I was like, that's AI. You just know straight away. And, you look at it and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's a, good looking, nice picture that, if you were told an artist drew it in the time before AI, you'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. But somehow we just know. Somehow the emptiness inherent in it, even if the craftsmanship is perfect, we are aware of, and that repulses us. It's that uncanny valley thing where you kind of, you watch a CGI'd character in a movie, you just kind of go, it's just not quite right. And that's what I find when I read AI stuff or look at AI art. And I truly do not believe, my cynicism has not reached such depths that I think that all of the readers out there could ever be fooled by that kind of thing. And I don't think AI, even if it can learn all the rules and all the technical things and get all of that perfectly, I don't think AI can ever come close to replicating what humans bring to their work. See, it's funny, when I think about the opening and the closing of the book, which do reflect each other in some ways, that was completely accidental. And it was completely accidental because I was fretting about pace. I was looking at my first act of the book and I was being like, is enough happening? Is enough drawing people in? Then I think back to the classic Hitchcock principle of tension, which is if two characters are sitting by a table and a bomb goes off and blows them away, that's not tension. If the characters are sitting by the table and a camera pans under the table, reveals a bomb and pans back up, then we're tense because we're waiting for the bomb to go off. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to introduce a prologue for the book that makes it very clear that somebody is watching our main character. So everybody she meets and speaks to in the first act of the book, we are going to wonder, is this the person? Is this the person? Is this the person? Then as the book goes on, there's a couple of different candidates for it. So I had no intention of writing an epilogue, but by the time I got to the end of the book, I'd finished it and the whole thing just felt a little bit incomplete where the final chapter ended. And then I had this idea of doing pretty much exactly what I did in The Hunted, which was taking almost the same text as the prologue and sort of rewriting it with a slight tweak to speak to how the character or the circumstance had changed. And I took that and I pushed it a little bit further. And once I added it and I kind of looked at the book as a whole, I was like, yeah, that's right. It's that nice full circle symmetry. I'm a sucker for symmetry and for full circle storytelling. And so the opening and closing speaking to each other in that way just felt spot on for me. I don't think that any book I write is working unless something unplanned happens along the way. And that could be that a character reveals themselves to be more or less than what I thought they were. That could be that somebody dies unexpectedly. That could be that a twist I didn't see coming sort of comes along and throws the whole thing in a different direction. In the case of The Caretaker, I don't want to spoil too much, but there was one character who was supposed to meet a sticky end at one point in the book, a lot earlier than sort of towards the end of the book. And the more I wrote, the more I just found that I really, really liked this character. And their survival beyond the point I'd initially planned for ended up being crucial to the way that the story wrapped up. So that was kind of my fun little, I love it when the story sort of takes me in an unexpected direction. And that happened in The Caretaker, and it's sort of, at this point, almost my lucky charm when something like that happens in a book. You know, I almost hate to say this because I feel like it's an author cliche right now, but the thing that I am the most passionate and excited by at the moment is Yellowface. Like every author is probably saying, and maybe that's because we're biased and because it's such a brilliant, incisive kind of satire of the literary industry, and we all kind of feel a little bit too sort of seen by that book and like we relate a little bit too much to it. But I also just think it is this really clever, even-handed, nuanced look at just a lot of the questions that are really sort of in the ether at the moment, a lot of things that we're thinking about and talking about and discussing and debating. And it takes on those questions from some really interesting and unexpected angles while still being laugh out loud funny and a page-turning thriller at the same time. So, I mean, if you haven't read Yellowface, and at this point, I don't think anyone hasn't read Yellowface, but I can't recommend it highly enough. So next up, I have a middle grade book out in January, Andromache Between Worlds, which is a bit of a change of pace. It's about a 14-year-old girl who's been brought up in the shadow of a couple of famous adventurers. Her father died when she was very young. She kind of resents the legacy that she's been left with, and then she finds out that her father isn't dead. He's trapped in a parallel universe, sending her on a mission to try to save him, and in the process figure out who she is and step out of her parents' shadow. So that's kind of fast-paced, funny, action-packed, adventurous, quirky, very, very different to this, but I'm really excited for it. And I've just started initial work on my next adult thriller, which will be a very different thing again, but I'm really excited for it. And if you like The Caretaker, there are maybe a couple of characters making another appearance again, so stay tuned, I guess.